What up, YouTube? This one right here. This is part of the series of the book leading up to Nestorius. Well, really, the blog leading up to Nestorius, but the book, The Bazaar of Heracleides. So, in this one, I wanted to kind of like touch on some of the people that existed during the period of Jesus and see if I can, when I was reading about this, I wanted to see if I could find like some type of hint or mention of Jesus during this time period, even though whether he is mentioned or not is not really a big deal to me, and I explain why later on by the time I get to the end of this. But as far as like some of the emperors and the notable people that lived during this period, I've researched further into them. Now everything that I read up until this point is basically Wikipedia articles. So the first emperor that I started with was Augustus, and then as far as like being contemporaries to the life period of the Jesus, you got Emperor Augustus, then you got Tiberius Caesar, and then you got Caligula or whatnot. But because this is a particular dynasty that even kind of like lingered on past the lifetime of Jesus up until 68 AD, I took it upon myself just to read further about all of them and kind of like get a little bit more understanding as far as like some of the notable events that took place or whatnot. So the first guy I started out with was Augustus. Now, Augustus officially became emperor in 27 BC. Now, like prior to that, Rome had like a civil war that took place. It was three main factions, and they were referred to as the triumvirate or whatnot. But he came out more so like the victor, so he was more favored. So by the time 27 BC came, which is really just the year is significant because of the first constitutional settlement, which was basically just demarcating like jurisdictions between the senators and then the emperor of Rome. And as far as like what could or could not be done, for example, the provinces that Augustus had control over or a major say-so over was the ones that these are provinces that he held during the Civil War as well. But as far as like the first constitutional settlement, it was Egypt, Cilicia, Cyprus, Hispania, and I think Gaul. Those are the main ones. As far as the ones that the senators had jurisdiction over, it was Macedonia, North Africa, and Illyria. All right, now the significance of the settlement is this. It's like, okay, even though like Augustus was the emperor of Rome or Caesar, he didn't have a major, like for example, like say like a governor of one of the provinces that the senators had, either of those three. If they wanted to make a conquest or whatnot, preferred the land within proximity of these provinces, the emperor couldn't veto their decisions at this point. You know what I'm saying? But see, as far as like Augustus, based on Wikipedia, he kind of like had a humble attitude. They were saying like he was reluctant to be considered like a monarch. And even some of the titles that they wanted to give to him, he was reluctant of taking, but he still ended up taking it anyway. So that was like the first constitutional settlement. That's in 27 BC. They didn't mention like a co-consular at the time, only like later on. So I'm assuming that he didn't have one yet at this point until like 24 BC. That's when he decided that he wanted this guy named Gaius Norbanus Flaccus. But he had ended up dying, and so another guy was chosen. His name is Aulus Terentius Varro. And then the final guy that was also chosen was a guy named Marcus Agrippa. This is in 23 BC. Now, 23 BC is kind of relevant because a big situation took place as far as like the governor of Macedonia at the time. Remember, Macedonia was a province under the senators. So these are my thoughts or whatnot, but I still, because I'm going to post this on YouTube and Instagram, I want to still explain it so whoever listens could kind of like follow along. Now, as far as like in 23 BC, this guy named Marcus Primus, right, the governor of Macedonia, he took it upon himself to make a conquest and go against the Thracian tribes. Now, it is claimed that the Thracian king at that time was an ally of the Romans. So a whole little conflict occurred because Marcus Primus, when he was brought on trial, he claimed the emperor had gave a permission for this. Now the reason why this caused a little ruckus and the emperor himself took it upon, he decided to show up at this trial is because, Wikipedia was saying like, okay, like he had a humble attitude. He didn't want to be considered a monarch. So it was a little campaign going on, like, because he considered himself like the first citizen of Rome. Like a humble, it was kind of like a humble approach. So if it had been true that this guy Marcus Primus got permission from him, it would contradict the Constitution, that the constitutional settlement that took place in 27 BC. And because you had a civil war prior to this, it could have snowballed into another incident as such. So he showed up at the trial and gave his testimony and denied that he gave Marcus Primus any type of permission, to pursue this conquest and attack the Thracian tribes or whatnot. Now, it was a guy named Murena who defended Marcus Primus, and Wikipedia was saying like he was kind of like aggressive with the emperor, asking him why did he show up and etc. But as far as like the result of this trial, that guy was found guilty. He was found guilty by a majorative vote rather than like everybody. As far as like everybody being unanimous or whatnot. But he still ended up getting killed. Now that same year, Augustus had, he was sick or whatnot. He fell ill, and then he recovered. So it was a guy that he chose to be his co-counselor. His name is Marcus Agrippa. From that point, he kind of fell back, and some of like the citizens of Rome, because Augustus was in their favor, I guess they were kind of lacking in prudence in what was going on. So riots took place in 22, 21, and 19 BC because of the I don't know how to put it. Basically, because like he gave up his consulship by that time. So these citizens didn't know what was going on or whatnot. So it was decided, as far as like Marcus Agrippa, just for him to kind of like still hold office, but not elect another co-counselor to help him out at the same time. Now, again, as far as like the second constitutional settlement that happened a year prior to Augustus giving up his consulship, again, that was when he was given like his powers were increased, because based on the first settlement, like I say, he didn't have an ultimate say-so over the jurisdiction of the senators or whatnot. But in 23 BC, as far as the second constitutional settlement, he did. And not only was he given these powers, like if they had made whatever decision that they wanted to make as far as the senators, if the emperor disagreed with that, he was able to veto their decisions without consequence, basically. So that's pretty much that. That kind of like, set a precedent as far as the power of the emperor of Rome at that time. Now, also during this same period, you had a conflict or a conquest, an ongoing conquest that was still taking place more so in northern Spain, because Spain had already been a province of Rome. But it was a tribe called the Asturias tribes, which was in Leon, northwestern Spain. And there was also another site called Las Medulas, and it was supposed to be like a rich area, like they were supposed to have been rich in gold deposits and things of that nature or whatnot. So that conquest took place for about 10 years, and those people were finally quelled, and then that area was finally annexed into the province of Hispania in 19 BC. All right, so that was like a notable event that took place under Augustus. And as far as his consulship, they were saying like he still never came into office, because like the whole thing as far as the consulship, let me say this real quick, it's similar to like the United States. You know how you got like the president and then you got the vice president. It was kind of like that. But again, because of this precedent that was set, even though we had these counselors of Rome, being that Augustus was the emperor with these imperial powers, he still was pretty much at the top, even though he didn't have an official position at this point. And Wikipedia, they were saying like he didn't necessarily like not really take office, but kind of like delve into these official affairs as far as meetings and stuff like that until like what? Only what? Once in 5 BC and 2 BC to, I guess, like his stepson or whatever. Like basically he just basically really didn't show his face. You know what I'm saying? And the reason why I say that is because in 22, 21, and 19 BC, you know, you had riots that took place during those 3 years because, like, the fellow citizens of Rome, and I'm going to say the less prudent ones, really didn't know what was going on, so they thought it was some type of conspiracy against the emperor. They wasn't really knowledgeable to the fact that he kind of like gave up his consulship. So that's that. Now you fast forward, another notable event that took place was this whole battle of the Teutoburg Forest in Germany. Now this happened in 9 AD, and as far as this battle, you know, the general at the time that marched there were like 4 legions. His name was Publius Quintilius Varro. He had 4 legions with him as well as some allies. Now, as far as like the total number of all of these soldiers that constituted them collectively, I think it was anywhere between 22,000 and 40,000 soldiers. Could have been more than that, but it was somewhere around that number or whatever. So 4 legions and allies. And when they marched, they had a guy named Arminius. Now, Arminius, who marched with Publius Quintilius Varro, you know, he turned into a spy. Like, he had originally came from Germany, but, you know, he was kidnapped as a boy when he was like, what, 10 years old, something like that. So he was raised in the Roman military, so he kind of was very familiar with their tactics and fighting style. And not just that, you know, he gave the barbarians somehow intel about this conquest or this raid that was going to take place in that year. I dropped my cigarette. In 9 AD or whatnot. So because of this intel, the barbarians decided to ambush the Romans. Now, Arminius, as he, you know, even though he gave these barbarians the intel, he still marched there along the way with the general Publius Quintilius Varro or whatnot. So they ended up getting ambushed, and all 4 legions was all 4 legions along with their allies were wiped out. Now, when I was reading about this, they were saying like it was a big blow and very fucking emasculating to the Romans because of these aquilas that they would carry. It was basically like a standard, and these aquilas had a symbol that pertained to the specific legions at the time. Now, as far as these legions that marched with Varro, the symbol was an eagle symbol. So not only did they get wiped out, but they lost all their standards. So it was a big blow. Again, when I read about these symbols, I read it was like if a legion or even a Roman soldier lost these symbols or these quilas or these standards, you know, it was kind of like, it was considered a big deal because it was a lot of sentimental value invested in that. So in my mind, the first thing that popped up is kind of like this whole chain shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know how, like, I don't want to be generic and say on the streets, but like, you know, if you're a person of a certain ilk or whatever, and you lose your chain, it would be considered emasculating. Kind of like in hip hop, where people, like, I'll give you an example. It's a show from the early 90s called The Awakening, right? And it had to be season 4, episode 7 or 8. Now, as far as like this show, The Awakening, it took place in Chicago. It was a Colombian drug lord by the name of Antonio, you know what I mean, who sold kilos or whatever. And then there was another guy named Bone, a black guy, who was really ambitious. So they had an agreement to meet up at a warehouse to where Bone was going to buy some kilos from Antonio. Check on my phone. From Antonio, but Bone hired some game bangers or whatnot, you know what I'm saying, to set him up. Long story short, it was a big ass shootout that occurred at this warehouse. Following the shootout, it was a detective and then a female, I forget the detective's name. His partner, the woman, she was a dirty cop or whatever, and she was working for Antonio on the low, so she would also give him intel of what was going on. When they was walking around the warehouse and expecting everything that was going on and they was seeing the dead bodies, this detective, as far as the guy, like, he had it in for like gang bangers, drug dealers, and people of that sort or whatnot. So when he was watching all these dead bodies, he was basically venting out loud. In the midst of that, he ended up finding a chain on the floor. He picked it up and he realized it was Antonio's chain. Long story short, his partner, the female, had a meeting with Antonio inside of his office, and she mentioned to him that her partner found his chain. When she mentioned that, Antonio, his whole little demeanor changed or whatever, and then he told her that she was gonna have to somehow get his chain back. She was like, "How I'm gonna be able to do that? My partner already becoming suspicious, etc." But he yelled, and when he yelled at her, he shook her. You know what I'm saying? Her shoulders stiffened or whatever, and he told her, he was like, "No, you gonna get my chain, blah blah blah." That's one example. As far as like the sentiment, as far as like these Aquilas with the Romans, it kind of reminded me of that, and that's what I thought about when I was reading this. I give two more. Battle, and this is not too long ago, between a rapper by the name of Cortez and then another guy by the name of Drugs. Now this guy Drugs, he was from Washington D.C. Now, right before the battle started, like if you watch the battle, you're not gonna see it, but it's a compilation on YouTube, and it's called Intense Moments in Battle Rap. It's a part 1 and a part 2. I believe this clip was taken from, or a part of part 1 or whatnot, but when you watch it, it's like this. You got Drugs standing to the left, you got Cortez to the right. You got a female personality within battle rap by the name of New Nail. She was standing in the center, but not directly between them, but from the camera's angle, she was basically in the center or whatever, hosting the battle. Right before it started, you could see the guy Drugs kind of like talking shit to Cortez, whether he was trying to get in his head or disrespect him or whatever, but he mentioned the fact that Cortez's chain got lost, because supposedly Cortez got knocked out in Washington, D.C., I believe, in Washington, D.C., and some guy stole his chain. So when Drugs was harping on that, you look at Cortez, he's like, "Oh, the nigga that took my chain, he dead, blah, blah, blah." Basically saying he gonna get his. When you look at Drugs, you can hear him saying, "The nigga that took your chain is not dead, stop lying." So they going back and forth or whatever, right? Cortez said something to him about him talking to him a certain way. The guy was like, "I can say what I want to say, da da da." You can see Noodle Nail staring at Drugs, you know what I'm saying? Like, damn, this dude doing too much or whatever. So they got into a little conflict. Because Drugs is like, what did he say? He was like, we got one or whatever. The little argument happened. They settled that shit and then the battle took place. So that was another example as far as like people placing sentimental value on a chain, to me, which is kind of like synonymous with these Aquilas. Final example I'm going to give in that regard, because I got a whole bunch of them, was, I forget the name of the fucking song, but it's with Young Jeezy. And I remember the quote. He was like, "A nigga took my chain, yeah, motherfucking right. You better off saying that nigga took my life." So in saying that, you can almost say it's kind of like the same, like as far as like a person losing their chain or whatnot, when they lost these Aquilas, that's how the Romans felt. They felt castrated because, as far as like these Wikipedia articles that I read, they were always, a lot of this information was gathered from like really 4 main historians that they were mentioned. One, his name is Josephus I. Another one, his name is Tacitus. Another guy's name is Cassius Dio. And then the final guy's name is Sutorius. All right. Now, I believe it was Tacitus that they quoted from in this article. Anyway, I believe it was Tacitus that they quoted from, and based on this quote, Augustus would say to himself, my legion, or bring me back my legion, Varros, or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Basically, like I said, it was a big blow to the Romans, and they didn't get revenge for that until much later during Tiberius Caesar's tenure as emperor or whatnot. So that's that. Let me see. I want to make sure I'm not forgetting anything before I go to Tiberius. Also, like slightly before that, okay? Now, as far as Judea, all right? Actually, that was one of the provinces that the Romans had as far as Augustus during the first constitutional settlement, when they agreed upon a 10-year period for him to still, kind of like, be in control of these provinces and make sure everything was right, because again, that goes back to the fact that he didn't want to come off as a monarch, blah, blah, blah. Now, going back to this period as far as Judea, within the region of Judea, it was a guy named Herod the Great, all right? Now, he was the king of Judea from, I believe, 37 BC up until 4 BC. And he was kind of like a client king at the same time, meaning he was an ally of the Romans, but his territory wasn't considered other than autonomous. You get what I'm saying? In other words, like Judea as a whole wasn't a part of the province of Syria. You see what I'm saying? They were kind of like allies to the Romans, but not like subjects in a sense. Now, as far as Herod the Great, you know, who's also mentioned in the Bible during the period of Jesus, he died in 4 BC. Now, he had some sons and some daughters. And he basically made a move that was similar to like, who was it? The Jimenez dynasty of Spain during the 10th century, when Sancho the Great gave, like, you know, his sons power over various territories and split that shit evenly. I ain't gonna go into all that right now because I don't want to get too off the point. But as far as like Herod the Great, he did the same thing. Now, he had a son named Philip, and in these Wikipedia articles, he's referred to as Philip the Tetrarch. Now, he gave him, as far as within Judea, he gave him kingship of 3 main places. More than 3, but 3 main ones that they mentioned in Wikipedia, which was Botania, Auranitis, and Trachonitis. Trachonitis, you know, even though they said like it was a part of Judea, it was confusing for me at first because Trachonitis was supposed to be like, it's only like 31 miles southeast of Damascus. And it was a lava field pretty much or whatnot. The reason why I was kind of confused is because I'm like, Judea, because like when you look up Judea as far as the provinces back then, it was basically all of Palestine. I want to say northern Arabia. You could say northwestern Arabia, because Jordan also, everything like east of the Jordan River was also considered a part of the province of Judea, you know what I'm saying, or the territory of Judea. And then even when you go south, like say you go to southern Jordan, you got northwestern Arabia, and then you got southern Palestine, pretty much as a whole. That right there, all that encompassed, that was considered Edomite territory. But all of this was a part of Judea. So I was kind of confused when I read about this, because as far as like, you know, the Islamic history that I know about, the region of Haran, which would be southern Syria and northwestern Jordan. That region was considered or called Haran. So when it was like, okay, Trachonitis, for example, being that it's 31 miles southeast of Damascus, I'm like, that would pretty much be in Syria. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, that means that area or that region of Haran, which partially encompassed southern Syria, was also a part of the Judean territory. You know what I mean? So I got a little bit more clarity about that, even though initially I was confused. So basically, Trachonitis, Auranitis, and Botania, and a few other cities was under the jurisdiction of Philip the Tetrarch. And this started from 4 BC. And they, well, I'm going to say it right now. I ain't going to wait till, you know what I'm saying, the period of Tiberius or whatnot. As far as these territories, they lost their autonomy to the Romans sometime around 34 AD. Now, the other brother, as far as Herod the Great's son, his name was Herod Antipas, right? He had jurisdiction over quite a few, but the main ones was Galilee, which is west of the Sea of Galilee, and Perea, which is basically bordering western Jordan, all the way up until close to the Sea of Galilee, pretty much. Those are 2 territories that he had jurisdiction over, and he didn't lose his autonomy until like 39 AD, and then the final one was their sister. Her name was Salome the First. Now, it was a place called Jemna. Now, that is pretty much northeast of the Gaza Strip, not too far from it, probably no more than 50 or 60 miles from it. That's where she had jurisdiction over, and then she didn't lose her autonomy until what, the year that she died, which was what, 10 AD, and then that's when they became, you know, annexed under the Roman province of Syria. You know what I'm saying? All those territories that I mentioned, but she definitely lost hers during Augustus's reign. So that's that. Let me see. As far as like that, Augustus ended up dying in what, 14 AD. He was on the way to a city that he was born in called Nola, Italy, and he died from that point. All right, so that's that. After him, Tiberius Caesar became the emperor. And actually, I want to mention one more thing as far as like a notable event during Augustus's reign that also occurred in 12 BC. As far as who was it? Nero, Claudius, Drusus, and Tiberius himself. As far as Las Medulas in northern Spain, as far as them annexing them and fully quelling them by 19 BC, which added to the riches of the Roman, it helped fund, in addition, these military moves that were made by Nero Claudius Drusus when he went into Germany. I was going to say Gaul, but just to make it simple, it'd be more specific. Germany, when he went into the Rhineland of Germany or whatnot, that was in 12 BC. And then as far as Tiberius, he went into Eastern Rome, the territory of Pannonia, basically. Pannonia, not Pannonia, Pannonia or whatnot. So that was the same year, and they both were successful. By 9 BC, now as far as Nero Claudius Drusus, you know, even though the Romans were proud of the moves that he made, he ended up dying by accident because he fell off his horse or whatnot. So that's that. So going back to Tiberius Caesar, when he became the emperor of Rome in 14 AD, first thing they mention on Wikipedia is that like his legions that were still in Gaul and also legions that were in Pannonia, they ain't rebel, but they kind of like protested somewhat because they was promised some type of extra bonus and they didn't get it or whatever. So one of the first things that Tiberius did was to send like some factions there. He sent Germanicus, all right? Germanicus ended up becoming popular, and I'm about to say why. He sent them there to kind of like, you know, remedy the situation, in which he did. And then following that, he also took a few of those factions with him, and then they marched further into Germany. Now, this is when the Romans get payback and avenged for the great battle that they lost 5 years prior to that. When he marched into Germany, that's when he started to fight, because a part of kind of like the remedy of these, because they use the term mutiny, so you know what I mean? So basically, like the people in Pannonia, for example, were not doing what the fuck they were supposed to do, all right? So in addition to remedy that, aside from him going there and setting them straight, they was like, okay, we're going to march into Germany or Gaul, and whatever fucking goods that you get, you go ahead and keep it. You know what I mean? It's yours. When they did that, they ended up making a lot of leeway or whatnot. They gained a lot of ground. So they just continued that shit for the next 2 years. By the time 16 AD came, they defeated the barbarians, especially because it was different factions of them, but especially those who fought and defeated the Romans 7 years prior in 9 AD. So they made it all the way to the Teutoburg forest, you know what I'm saying? So they cut through Rhineland. Because like, okay, when you look at the map of Germany, right? Okay, in eastern Germany, you got the Elbe River, all right? It starts from like, it runs through, it basically runs through Germany, but really starting, as far as like within the territory of Germany, it starts from like western Germany, horizontally, zigzags or traverses or whatever, and then runs into the North Sea, all right? But again, that's all the way in eastern Germany, not western Germany, eastern Germany. As far as western Germany, you got the Rhine River, kind of like the same shit. It runs through western Germany and then it pours into the Northern Sea, the North Sea. Everything between that is considered Rhineland. So as far as going back to Germanicus, when they started like gaining more territory, again, by the time 16 AD came, they made it to the opposite side of the Rhine River on the western side, and they defeated the barbarians and gained their territory as well. Now, as far as like what took place in 9 AD, the legions that were killed, they found a spot there within this forest that had like bones, you know, say the bones of many of these men that were killed, and they ended up recovering 3 Aquilas, 3 of the 4 Aquilas that they lost. So Germanicus was greatly celebrated for that. And again, based on Wikipedia, they were saying like as far as his prospect, he was more than likely going to become the next emperor from that point. But aside from him being rewarded what they call a triumph, which was 2 years later in 18 AD, he was also given governorship over Syria. Now this is when the other guy, his name is Gnaeus Calpurnius Piso. He was kind of like of the same, this is Wikipedia, he was kind of like of the same position as Germanicus, even though they were saying Germanicus probably had a little bit more say-so or whatnot, but they had issues back and forth, so Germanicus ended up sending Pisus back, which is telling also, which kind of shows that he really did have more of a say-so. When they sent them back, they said Pisus felt some type of way. So Germanicus ended up dying in like what? 19, a year later, 19 BC. I mean, not BC, my bad, 19 AD. But shortly before that, he claimed that Pisus poisoned him. So, or Piso poisoned him. So Calpurnius Piso was put on trial for that. And it was looking like he was going to be found guilty, so he got afraid and committed suicide. So that's what happened with that. Let me see. I think that was in 20 AD. Then Tiberius Caesar was kind of, you know, that's when he started making trips like 2 years later in 22 AD to a place called Capri. It was supposed to have been an island, which is west of Campania in southwestern Italy or whatnot. So he kept making these trips, and they were saying like yearly these trips became more and more longer or whatnot. So it was another guy by the name of what was his name? Because he was like the prefect at the time. Now, let me go into this time real quick just to make it clear. I gotta check on my phone and shit. The prefect was kind of like a, I guess you could say general, just to make it more understandable. Kind of like a general, but of the Praetorian Guard. The Praetorian Guard, they was like a special military group, but they were more assigned with protecting the emperor of Rome. You know what I'm saying? And so they had factions within Rome and also slightly outside of Rome. So this guy right here, by the time Tiberius Caesar, you know, by the time he started making his trips outside of Rome or whatnot to this island or whatever, you know, he kind of like left that guy in charge. You know what I'm saying? The prefect. Now his name was Lucius Aelius Sejanus. All right. Now, Wikipedia was saying like he had a little bit more extra power, even though not necessarily official, because everything ran under the bureaucracy. But he had a little bit more power and a little bit more leeway, because by the time Tiberius kind of like, you know, started making all these trips outside of Rome for long